Hello, everyone. This video is to talk about integrating sources, both in your reaction papers and as we move towards the final research paper eventually for this class. Don't panic yet, okay? So let me go ahead and share my screen. And I know that you already tried your hand at the reaction papers last week. So you've already been doing this, integrating several sources at once, but I want to go through a specific example since we are writing intensive class to talk about how can we best integrate multiple sources. And when I say sources, in our case for this class, I mean your primary source, like a play, and your secondary source, like the articles I'm having you read each week, or as you go into your final paper, you'll have your own sources that you're finding, okay? So our theme for this paragraph that I kind of swiped from another paper to look at here is manliness in Macbeth. So we talked about this earlier this week already, so you'd be familiar with, okay, there's this discussion of what is a man in Macbeth. I'm going to read through this paragraph with you, and then I'm going to take you through it bit by bit to show how the writer here is folding in both quotes from Shakespeare itself, like the play itself, and a quote from another secondary source, okay, and how they marry those together to make one solid point. So to start off, it says, we have a topic sentence here, okay, and it says, Lady Macbeth asserts a disturbing and extremist interpretation of what it means to be a man, which Shakespeare uses as a way of persuading his audience to question such definitions of masculinity. So, okay, so this topic sentence is saying two things. First, we have to prove that Lady Macbeth has a radical interpretation of what it means to be a man in this paragraph in order to have support for it, right? And the second thing that it's saying is that this leaves room for the audience to question the standard definition of masculinity, or her question of her definition of masculinity. Excuse me. Okay. So basically what it's saying is Lady Macbeth has this extreme interpretation of what it means to be a man, and Shakespeare is using that to make the audience recoil from it and question her definition of manhood. Okay. Because it was a little bit popular at the time, some of the things that she was saying. Okay. So how do we prove this in this paragraph? This person writes, one of the prime examples would serve to show Lady Macbeth's definition of a man occurs in Act 1 of the play. So remember, we have to show what her definition is. Macbeth is confiding in her about his doubt in killing King Duncan, and even goes so far as to assert that a real man would not go so far as to kill an innocent king when he states, I dare do all that may become a man, who dares do more is none. Lady Macbeth's response stands in stark contrast to her husband's. When durst you do it, then you were a man, implying that a real man is an action-oriented achiever and seizes any opportunity to claim power, even if it means being a murderer, okay? So basically what this person has done is to prove their point, their main point in yellow up here, all right, that Lady Macbeth asserts a disturbing and extremist interpretation of what it means to be a man. We have her definition. She's saying a real man would kill an innocent king. And that's kind of shocking, right? We have the primary source quotes to show it, okay? And they've cited it here. And the other thing that this person has done is folded it into their own sentence. So what I don't want you to do is leave a drop quote, like just throw a quote in there and not integrate it in with your own words. This is your paper, whether it's your response papers or whether it's your final research paper at the end. Something you want to make sure to do is fold it into your own sentence and then place the in-text citation at the end with the period after it, okay? So you need to fold it into your sentence, but because you also need to include an explanation of the quote. So we're all reading Shakespeare at the same time. We're all having our own reactions to it, and we can all interpret quotes differently. So I can't tell you, there's probably thousands of papers written on Macbeth and Shakespeare that have one of these quotes in it, but every single one is going to have the author explaining it differently with their own take on it. Okay, so you have to include your explanation of a quote in order for it to be fully integrated. So you're integrating it into your own sentence, but then you're also explaining it. Okay, so here we see, he goes so far to assert that a real man would not do this. And then we explain, and then Lady Macbeth's response stands in stark contrast to her husband. So we're explaining that this is in contrast to it, implying that a real man seizes this opportunity to claim power, even if it means being a murderer. Okay. So this person's doing a pretty good job. That's why I chose it as a strong example here, right? The next thing that this person writes is a quote from their secondary source. So they have support from their primary source, the play itself, and now they want to also support it with a secondary source. Okay, so they put, eventually the ferocious determination with which she goads and challenges and manipulates him pays off, and he murders King Duncan without justifiable cause. And this is from Hubert, page 127 here. Okay, so she keeps goading him, she keeps pushing him, and eventually he commits the murder that she wants him to commit without justifiable cause. Okay, so this is the result of her sort of pushing and prodding him, right? All right, and we can see here we have the same thing going on. They've selected the parts of the quote that they absolutely need to talk about and prove their point, and they left the rest out. They folded it into their own sentence here. Then they go back to the primary source to help fold it in. So after the murder, Macbeth is shaky, again confiding in his wife his doubts about what he has just done and wishing he could escape it. Rather than responding in a loving manner, she chides him, infirm of purpose. Okay, so she kind of emasculating him here, right? So he commits the murder, he feels bad about it, he's shaky, he has doubts about it. And instead of responding in a loving manner, she's like, you're, I'm going to emasculate you. You can hardly commit this deed that you should have done. And then we go on to explain again that quote. The person writes, this insult is a double entendre, undercutting his manliness, both in his faltering will for action to assume power and in his inherent flaw of not being a father. Okay, so it's a double insult here. We're explaining why we've included this quote, because it feeds into her definition of manliness. Her definition of manliness is somebody who can get the job done and who's a father, right? And that would have been sort of a common view at the time, that a real man is a father, and a real man exhibits some of these more masculine qualities, what we might call toxic masculinity today, right? Okay. Lastly, and most importantly, we need to have an interpretation or an understanding of what you think of this as the writer when you are integrating sources well. Okay, so we have at this point, Macbeth has the sympathy of the audience, okay, because she berates him. For her, berating him is a repulsive way of responding to someone who she herself has convinced to commit such a crime. So even though this toxic masculinity is around at the time, and we hear toxic masculinity talked about still today, it still would have made the audience recoil possibly because it's so extreme, and she's the one who got him to commit the murder in the first place, and then she's cutting him down for it. Okay, so when recoiling from Macbeth's outrageous kind of manliness, the audience makes room for a new, broader definition that allows room for more nuance than the toxic masculinity Lady Macbeth is spewing. So basically, we are in the second part of our topic sentence here, where this writer is saying that by getting the audience to recoil and be like, wow, Lady Macbeth's definition of masculinity is like extremely toxic and crazy. Maybe Shakespeare's trying to open everybody's mind to see like, hey, there's better ways of being a man than toxic masculinity. So that is one way of interpreting this text, okay? I don't expect you to do this in your short weekly papers. You do not have to do this in your short response papers. I'll say it again, okay? But you can play with it. You should be trying it. You do have to include 2 quotes from your primary source and 1 quote from the secondary source article. They do not have to be a super polished thesis-driven paper. That's not the point. The point is your reaction from it, and to get you comfortable with integrating sources. All right, so I'm showing you this example from a more developed paper, just so you have an example to go from, basically. But I have also a student example attached to those response papers so that you can, you can see what one actually looks like. It's not as thesis-driven but this was a good example for showing you what you're building towards in those weekly papers and what your final research paper will do more of, which is build on evidence from primary and secondary sources, okay? Explain what it means in your interpretation, all right? To arrive at your interpretation, argument, or thesis statement to prove a thesis about one of Shakespeare's plays, okay? So these will be the three components in each paragraph for your final paper, all right? And I know I'm getting ahead of myself here, but I'm trying to lay the groundwork in these shorter papers so that you have practice at, integrating sources well. You're folding in these quotes, you're adding your own words, you're explaining it, you're saying what you mean. And that is basically a starting point for thinking about a larger paper in this class. Okay, so I hope that was helpful to you to have that example. I look forward to seeing you online. Take care.